The Gilded Age has backstabbing billionaires, ruthless social climbers, and marriages so loveless, parents literally had to pay millions for them to happen. Today, I'm talking about the real people behind the show's juiciest drama, like the billionaire heiress who bought her way into high society, the legendary snob who literally handpicked New York's elite, and the scandalous socialite whose parties put Gatsby to shame. All these characters are based on actual historical figures. And trust me, reality was even crazier than fiction. Bertha Russell is basically Alva Vanderbilt from real life. Alva was married to William Vanderbilt. Big railroad tycoon, new money family, crazy rich. At first, Alva and her husband were looked down upon by the old money crowd, seen as tacky outsiders, but they spent so insanely on parties, mansions, and social events that eventually even Mrs. Astor, the queen of New York's elite, couldn't afford to keep ignoring them. Once Mrs. Astor realized she and her family would lose status by missing Vanderbilt's big parties, the Vanderbilts finally made their way into the inner circle. Eventually, they weren't just accepted, they were practically worshipped, since basically half of Manhattan depended on Vanderbilt money and influence. In the show, Carrie Coon's Bertha Russell goes through exactly the same thing. She's married to railroad tycoon George Russell, and she has this social rivalry going with Mrs. Astor, exactly like Alva in real life. And seriously, looking at old photos side by side, Carrie Coon and Alva Vanderbilt look ridiculously similar. You'd probably think George Russell is based directly on Alva's real husband, William Vanderbilt, but according to Julian Fellowes, George is actually inspired by Jay Gould, another super rich railroad tycoon from back then. Like George, Gould had piles of new money and the exact same issue. Mrs. Astor and her old money friends basically refused to accept him at first. Of course, eventually Gould's insane fortune was just impossible to ignore. They even added in a real event from Gould's life. Remember when George's workers started unionizing and going on strike in season 2? That's straight out of the history books. Jay Gould faced a massive railroad strike called the Great Southwest Railroad Strike of 1886. Gladys Russell is clearly modeled after Consuelo Vanderbilt, the actual daughter of Alva and William Vanderbilt. Like Gladys, Consuelo was quiet, gentle, and pretty much had her romantic dreams crushed by her mother's ambitions. Alva forced Consuelo to marry the Duke of Marlborough, totally loveless arrangement, just because he was an aristocrat and they wanted a title in the family. The Vanderbilts literally paid the Duke $2.5 million as a dowry to make this marriage happen. And while the wedding itself was huge and incredibly lavish, Consuelo was completely miserable. The marriage ended up unhappy, of course, and they finally divorced years later in 1921 after having 2 kids. Speaking of Gladys's husband on the show, the Duke of Buckingham seems pretty obviously inspired by Charles Spencer Churchill, the real 9th Duke of Marlborough. He inherited his title in 1892 and instantly started looking for a wealthy bride to fix his financial problems. When Alva Vanderbilt heard this, she jumped at the chance to have a duchess in the family, paid that $2.5 million dowry just so her daughter Consuelo could marry him. Of course, the Duke was totally in it for the money. The marriage was a mess, and like I said, they divorced in 1921 after 2 kids. The Duke of Buckingham and Gladys have already tied the knot in the show, and you can already see exactly where this is going. It's not going to end well. Mrs. Astor on the show is totally real. Caroline Schermerhorn Astor basically ran New York's high society in the late 1800s. She created Mrs. Astor's 400, a literal list of the 400 families she considered good enough to socialize with. Why 400 exactly? Because that's how many people fit comfortably into her ballroom. This list was published by the New York Times in 1892. And obviously, neither Jay Gould nor Alva Vanderbilt made the cut. No surprises there. Just like on the show, Mrs. Astor despised the new money families and did everything possible to keep them out of her inner circle. Donna Murphy plays Mrs. Astor, and she totally nails it. Perfectly snobbish, ice cold, and intimidating. Honestly, she's scary enough to freak out actual aristocrats. Ward McAllister was a real guy too, and a key figure in New York's elite circles. Like on the show, he was super close friends with Mrs. Astor, and if it weren't for him finally accepting new money people like the Vanderbilts, they probably never would have broken into society. Funny thing is, McAllister was new money himself. He made his fortune out in California, then went to Europe, learned all the customs and rules of high society, and came back to New York pretending he'd always belonged. Nobody even questioned it. He was basically the original Gossip Girl, wrote a book called Society as I've Found It, spilling secrets and observations about his rich friends. In the show, Ashley Atkinson plays Mamie Fish, who in real life was actually named Marion Fish, better known as Mamie. Don't let that severe expression and those fancy dresses fool you. Mamie Fish was basically the ultimate party girl of late 1800s New York. She was funny, sharp-tongued, and threw the kind of massive parties Gatsby himself would have envied. Mamie wasn't actually the richest lady around, but she knew everyone. And when Mrs. Astor passed away, Mamie stepped up with Alva Vanderbilt and took over as the queen of high society. Ashley Atkinson does a great job capturing her vibe, basically the perfect casting to portray a socialite who was always the life of every party. Thomas Fortune was a seriously important historical figure, both in the show and in real life. Born into slavery in Florida, he later studied journalism and law at Howard University, then became one of America's leading black journalists. He wrote books, spoke out tirelessly against racial injustice, and worked with major newspapers like the Gilded Age and the New York Globe. Fortune was a mentor to Booker T. Washington, who also appears in the Gilded Age, and co-founded the Afro-American League in 1890. In the show, he's the editor and mentor to Peggy, a fictional character who's also a black journalist. Sullivan Jones plays him with exactly the right mix of authority and charisma. Clara Barton was the founder and very first president of the American Red Cross. Total hero. During the Civil War, she personally helped nurse thousands of wounded soldiers. Later, President Lincoln himself helped her start an office to locate missing soldiers, which eventually reunited more than 20,000 men with their families. In the show, Clara pops up early in Season 1, fundraising for the Red Cross alongside some old money society ladies. Linda Emond plays her, and the resemblance is spot on. From the tightly styled hair to the flowery hat and lacy collar, they nailed Clara's look perfectly. Sylvia Chamberlain, played by Jean Triplehorn, isn't exactly a perfect one-to-one copy of Arabella Huntington, but their lives are close enough that it's pretty obvious who inspired the character. Both Arabella and Sylvia were scandalous widows, second wives of incredibly wealthy industrialists whose first wives had died not long before. In both cases, these ladies were their husbands' mistresses before they married, and both had sons that everybody knew were born out of wedlock. Society never really forgave either of them. Even the ultra-rich Astors refused to accept them. And here's one more scandal that Sylvia hasn't copied yet. After Arabella Huntington's husband died, she married his nephew, Henry Huntington. Sylvia Chamberlain hasn't gotten around to that one, at least not yet. JP Morgan is a pretty new addition to the Gilded Age. He just popped up briefly in some of Season 3 episodes, but obviously the real JP Morgan is legendary. He was basically the investment banker and financier of the Industrial Revolution, shaping America's economy and business scene forever. Bill Camp nails the look perfectly. Same stern face, same intense stare from Morgan's most famous portrait. It'll be interesting to see how they handle him as the series moves forward, but visually, it's uncanny. Oscar Wilde, obviously a super famous name, one of the most celebrated Irish playwrights of all time. In the Gilded Age, Wilde shows up in Season 2, celebrating the premiere of his first play. At this point in history, he hadn't yet written his biggest hits, like The Importance of Being Earnest or The Picture of Dorian Gray, but he was already becoming a big deal. Jordan's Sebastian Waller is great casting. He perfectly captures Wilde's playful, mischievous personality, right down to that trademark whimsical smirk. They clearly paid attention to getting the details right, and it definitely shows.